Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So today we begin a quick look at the second part of this book, Devi Mahatmyam or Chandi. In the first part that we studied last Sunday, we saw how the story begins, how a king who was a good king had taken care of his subjects well, but then there's trouble in his kingdom and he loses his kingdom. He's defeated, his own people turn against him, and feeling angry, lost, betrayed, he then gets up on his horse and goes deep inside a forest. And then he goes to the hermitage of a sage, and there he meets another gentleman. The king's name is Suratha, and he meets another one person who happens to be a merchant, and his name is Samadhi. And it turns out that that merchant also has feeling lost. He's lost his business, he's lost his family, his own family had betrayed him, they've turned against him, and they have driven him out of his own home. So both these lost souls meet at that hermitage of the sage Medhas. They both are upset, angry. At the same time, they also are filled with attachment. The kingdom that he has lost, he still feels attached to it. He's still thinking about the things that were there and how those things are, how the people are. Same with the merchant. The very family who had driven him out, he's thinking about them. Partly with anger, partly with sadness, partly with a kind of a love betrayed. So these two troubled souls then come to the sage. And then we saw how he tells them first the story of Madhuk and Kaitava, the two demons. There is the story about, we saw very briefly last Sunday, how Vishnu, between when the Srishti has come to an end, and in that state of Pralaya, when Vishnu is lying down, asleep, it's then that these two demons attack Brahma, who is sitting on a lotus which has stemmed out of Vishnu's navel. And how then Brahma invokes the Devi, who then alights, who is sitting on Vishnu's eyelids in the form of sleep. So she frees and Vishnu wakes up, and then with the power of the Devi, then how these two demons are slain. This was very briefly what we saw last time. The form of the Devi in the first part is quite abstract. We meet the Devi only in the form of the power, the Shakti of the Devi, the way it manifests, the way the Devi manifests in these two demons, in the form of anger and pride and insolence. So it's very abstract. But the part that we are going to see today, the second, the middle part, it's called Madhyama Charita in the book, is the Devi becomes more tangible. So if the tamasic aspects of the Shakti, the tamasic aspects of power, were what came on display in the first part. In the second part, we see the Rajasic part of the Devi, the Rajasic way the divine power manifests in the world outside and in the world inside. So we can imagine these two, the king and the merchant, staying at the sage's hermitage for some days, and then maybe a day later or 2 days later, which is not really mentioned in the book, the sage calls them again and then says, "Today I'll tell you another story." And this story is of another demon, not too different from the demons we met in the first part, Madhu and Kaitaba. The name of this demon is Mahishasura. Now, Mahisha in Sanskrit means a buffalo, and Asura means a demon. So it's a buffalo demon. So he's a demon who took the form of a buffalo. We find these terms in this text and in other texts as well. Asura as different from Sura. So Sura stands for the powers of goodness. They are often also called as Devas, the celestial ones, the shining ones. And the opposite of Sura is Asura, and which are these powers as well, but powers which have manifesting in negative, destructive, harmful ways. So Asura and Asura. Sometimes you'll also see the Asuras being referred to as Danava. Another way the Asuras get referred to in the text in the form of Daitya. So Daityas are said to be children of Diti, and the opposite of this Aditi. So there were these two, Aditi and Diti, and the Diti's children were called Daityas, who are these again, the negative forces that operate in creation. So there are these different terms that are used, whether it's Daitya, Danava, Asura in Sanskrit, all refer to these negative, harmful, destructive forces, as opposed from Sura or Deva, which are the forces of good. So this story about Mahishasura, so he was a very powerful demon. And the second section begins by telling us that there was this war between Mahishasura and his forces and the Suras, the Devas. The king of the Devas is always called Indra. Indra is not really the name of a person, although it might sometimes seem to be so, but it's more a kind of a position. So whoever occupies the position of the Lord of Heaven, again, not different, this is not the supreme being. The divine is always seen as that which transcends good and evil. So the Lord of the Heaven is the one who is presiding over the forces of good. And that presiding force, the one who is the king of the gods, is often called by the name Indra. So Indra and his forces and Mahishasura, the section begins by telling us they fought. And we see this happening throughout Indian mythological stories. It's a classical formulation that is present in mythologies around the world and in today as well. So essentially, the conflict in the world in which we live is between the forces of good and the forces of evil. And those forces can be defined and viewed and understood in many different ways, but that's basically what it is. So this second section begins with a battle, of war that started between Indra and his forces and Mahishasura, and they fought for 100 years. 100 years might seem a big deal to us, but in celestial terms, I don't think it's probably much. Anyway, for 100 years they fought, and Mahishasura defeated Indra. So, although we often believe good will conquer evil, and ultimately it almost always does, oftentimes there are these periodic battles which the forces of good lose, and that's what happened. So, Mahishasura vanquished the Devas and became the Lord of Heaven. He and his forces became the emperor. And Indra and these gods, they were just left wandering without they've lost their kingdom. Not very different from the king in the story, remember. He has also lost his kingdom. So these devas, they just wander about the creation on this earth as mere mortals. Again, a theme that gets repeated in Indian mythology. When these devas get dispossessed of what they have, they need to go and seek help. And almost always, they'll go and seek help from Vishnu or Shiva, the supreme beings. So, led by Brahma, all the gods go to Shiva and Vishnu and tell them their woes. Now, these gods, Swami Vivekananda refers to them also in his Jnana Yoga lectures, that it's all fine to kind of have this story in a mythological form. But is this real? Is this what really happened? Now, when we begin to ask the question, is this what really happened? We can get into a pretty complicated and pretty abstract discussion about what does it mean for something to happen really and so on. But we won't go into that now. It's enough to point out that history has its value, but mythology, myths are very important as well. As important or perhaps more important than history. If history tells us what happened at certain point of time, myth tells us what is happening right now. Not just what happened once, what happened in the past, but what is the reality, the ever-present reality. So, this battle between good and evil, it's not that it happened only at one point of time, that this is a continually happening phenomenon. It's something that is the reality as it is experienced now, as it was experienced in the past, and very likely will be experienced in the future as well. So then we go to the battle that occurred between Mahishasura and the Devas, and the Devas are lost. They go to Shiva and Vishnu, and they tell them, this is what has happened. Please restore the power of goodness in this universe. And then as soon as Shiva and Vishnu hear about what happened, how Mahishasura has taken over the rule of creation, and that puts the entire creation at peril. Think about it this way. If we look upon the gods as the controllers of the natural functioning of this creation, then when there is the regime change, when some people without any morals, without any values take over administration, then there's going to be chaos. So that is what Vivekananda was referring to. So he said these gods are the personification of the powers of nature. So all these things that we see happening around us, the water that we need, all living beings need for their survival, water, air, and all the cosmic natural functions, there has to be some conscious principles guiding them, controlling them, making sure that everything follows a natural order. Now that is what these different gods do. In fact, the weapon of Indra is called a thunderbolt. In Sanskrit, it's called a vajra. Why is it called a thunderbolt? Remember, when there is a thick cloud cover and the clouds hit against each other, then there is a sound of thunder. And very often it is associated with rain, because later on we have rain. So the thunderbolt is sometimes visualized as this great weapon that Indra has when he feels that there is need for water in this creation to sustain life. With his weapon, he pierces the clouds, and then rain comes. So that was how the ancient time they visualized, rather than seeing even simple thing as a rain as a merely a material phenomenon. They saw it as alive. They saw the entire creation as brimming with life and consciousness. And this was their way of expressing it. So all these gods who are in charge of controlling all these cosmic functions, they are now being removed. These forces of destruction and evil have taken over. And clearly, that is going to threaten life. What if now whoever is sitting in that position says, I am not going to release water, even when it is needed, because we are going to do something else with it, and so on. So that is the risk here. So when Shiva and Vishnu hear what these asuras have done, we read in the book that a light comes out of Shiva and Vishnu and then starts taking a form. And then these lights come out of all these gods present, and then it takes the beautiful form of the Devi. The interesting thing here is this. So this Devi that appears before them, the Devas are smart enough to recognize it's not that the Devi is formed out of the light emanating from these Devas. What these Devas quickly realize that light was not theirs to begin with, that the Devi already was present. The power, the Shakti was already, which was present in the hearts of all these Devas, but had apparently gotten fragmented into many of these different Devas, again got unified. And then there is this beautiful image of the Devi. And the book describes the resplendent form. It was so attractive, it was so powerful, it was so, the book does it in a much more poetic way than I am able to do it. But it was such that as soon as the Devi appeared before all these gods, they all bow down before her, prostrate before her. And then we read that from each of these gods, whatever weapons they had, the text says they realized that those weapons really belonged to the Devi, that they were only the instruments, they were only carrying all those weapons. So then they returned those weapons which were Devis back to the Devi. So here is this amazing, cosmic, shining, effulgent form of the Devi with all the weapons received. So it's essentially all the forces of goodness now unifying, which had gotten fragmented, which have all become unified in one. It's beautifully described. Let me read to you how this happens. This is the verses 14 onwards. The text describes how the light emanating from each of these devas formed a certain part of the Devi's body. From Shiva's light came that which formed the Devi's face. Yama's radiance formed her hair, and Vishnu's effulgence became her arms. The moon god's soft light formed her breasts, and Indra's brilliance became her waist. Varuna's light became her legs, and earth's splendor formed her hips. Her feet took shape from Brahma's light, and her toes from Surya's brilliance. From the Vasu's light her fingers formed, and from Kubera's light her nose. From Prajapati's luster came her teeth, and from Agni's radiance her 3 eyes were born. Many of the deities we find, the Devi certainly, with 3 eyes. Now that's a mythical way of describing that she is all-knowing, that she knows the past, present, and the future. So this knowing the past, present, and future gets represented as 3 eyes. Dawn and dusk became her eyebrows, the wind god's splendor shaped her ears, and all else born of the other god's light shone too as the auspicious Devi. So here is the Devi appeared, and then all these gods tell her what the problem is. And then she is there, filled with power, filled with this, all these weapons. And then it says that her very appearance starts shaking this entire creation. And especially all these forces, the anti-God forces, these forces of evil, they at once feel threatened. And when Mahishasura comes to know that here is this, all these forces of goodness now have come together, and this appearance of this mighty divine figure, the Mother Durga has appeared, he is mad, he is angry, he is furious, because he has become the Lord of the heaven, and now he feels his position is threatened. And as people will often do, immediately he dispatches his forces. And then we have a long scene, a battle scene in this section. It's a pretty bloody section. It's just filled. It's not for those who are weak of heart. It's not for people who just want to talk about non-violence. It's quite violent. There is blood, there is slashing and cutting of limbs. It's quite something. So if you haven't read it so far, don't be afraid, but just harden yourself when you start reading it and read the translation. So a very terrible battle ensues, and then you have the names of the different generals under Mahishasura, how one by one they come. And the Devi, of course, she is the Divine Mother herself. With practically effortlessly, she is able to dispose them off. They were mighty ones, and in the numbers that are given in the book are just in millions, a million soldiers, a million of this. So it's huge. But she just able to finish them off without difficulty. So read that section when you have time. And then finally, Mahishasura sees that a lot of his armed forces have gone. Many of his generals are lost. And then he says, it's time now for me to go. So Mahishasura appears. And a very ferocious battle ensues between the Devi and the Asura. It's no longer as effortless as it was in the beginning. The Devi could dispose of all these other people quite easily. But disposing of the Asura, Mahishasura, himself takes quite a bit of time and battle. And let me read to you a little bit of the description as it is given in the book. Nipatya pramathanikam abhyadhavat surah simham hantum mahadevya kopam chakre tatombika sopi kopan mahavirya kurakshunna mahitalah shrungabhyam parvatan uchchan chikshe pachananadacha. Sometimes when people recite these, they really recite it as if they are on battlefront. I am doing it in a very benign way. but some of these recitations, they make you feel as if you are on the battlefield. So let me read to you briefly how that thing is described in translation. But Mahishasura, great in valor, struck the earth angrily with his hooves, flung mountains skyward with his horns, and bellowed frightfully. Under his frenzied wheeling, the trampled earth broke apart. Lashed by his tail, the ocean overflowed all around. Thrashed by his horns, the clouds fragmented and dispersed. Tossed about on his blasting breath, mountains by the hundreds fell from the sky. When the Devi saw the great Asura approaching, inflated with rage, Chandika aroused her wrath and prepared to slay him. Chandika is another way the Devi is referred to oftentimes to show her furious, infuriating, angry form, often the word that is used. So whenever the Devi is referred to as Ambika, so it's her motherly, kind, affectionate form. So in Sanskrit, Amba means mother. And many words in many Indian languages, whether it's Amma or Ma, it all comes from this Amba. So whenever the Devi is generally referred to as Ambika, it's her motherly, kind, benign form. But whenever the Devi is there about to slay the forces of evil, she is often referred to as Chandika. And it's from this name that this same text is referred to by some as the Chandi. When she saw the great Asura approaching, inflated with rage, Chandika aroused her wrath and prepared to slay him. She threw her noose around him and bound him. Fettered thus in the fierce battle, the great Asura left his buffalo form and assumed the shape of a lion. No sooner had Ambika severed his head than he appeared as a man with sword in hand. Instantly, with her arrows, the Devi cut him to shreds along with his sword and shield. Then he took the form of a great elephant and dragged her mighty lion along with his trunk. But while he trumpeted loudly, the Devi chopped off his trunk with her sword. Once more the great Asura assumed his buffalo form and caused the three worlds, with all that is moving and unmoving, to tremble. Angered, Chandika, the mother of the worlds, drank a divine potion, and with eyes reddened, she laughed again and again. The Asura bellowed in return, intoxicated with his own might and valor, and with his horns he hurled mountains at Chandika. Her volley of arrows reduced them to dust. Her face flushed with inebriation from the divine drink, and she addressed him excitedly. The Devi said, "Bellow, you fool, bellow for now, while I drink this potion. After I have slain you, the gods will cheer in this very place." The seer said, having declared that, she leapt upon the great Asura, pinned his neck down with her foot, and pierced him through with her spear. Trapped there under the Devi's foot and crushed by her might, he emerged halfway in his true form from his buffalo mouth. Half revealed and fighting still, that great Asura fell to the Devi, beheaded by her great sword. Then, crying out in alarm, the whole demon army perished, and all the divine hosts exulted. Together with the great heavenly seers, the gods praised the Devi, the celestial musicians sang, and throngs of cloud nymphs danced. So this destruction of Mahishasura is a lesson for us. And we might kind of step back a little bit and ask, what is the point of all these stories and the battle and so on? The reason is not far to seek. Mahishasura may not have been historical, it's just a character in the Indian mythology. But as I said, myths are not about what happened, myths are about what is the reality. And the reality is, Mahishasura is present in every one of us. All these different, the Mahishasura's forces are all these different weaknesses and negative habits that we have acquired, which are these asuras within our own heart. But alongside these asuras in our own heart, every one of us also has strengths. We also have good qualities, we have values, we have principles. So that's the inner battle. The stresses that people experience in life, the tensions that we all experience in life, are the tensions between the better side of us fighting against the worst side of us. So this battle, while it might seem as if it happened somewhere high up in the heavens at some unspecified time, but really, this is the battle that is occurring right now in our own hearts. And so when the negativities of the heart overpower us and the goodness of our heart seems powerless, what are we to do? Now many, not all, but many, in such circumstances always seek divine help. And that is what really is these devas going to the Supreme Being and seeking, what are we to do? We want to do what is right, but the other forces, the negative forces, are so strong that we feel powerless. And it is then the Shakti, the source of all energy, the source of all power, which is already within our own heart, that is manifested. How is that manifested? Through prayer, through surrender. And surrender really is shown how this, in the form of these different devas in the story, it's through their light that this Devi emerges. And as I said, that light is of the Devi. In other words, the power of goodness, which can get fragmented in our own heart, we need to unify all the powers of good to battle, to fight, to vanquish, to destroy the forces of evil. And that is really what is meant here. And when we are able to do that, then oftentimes we will see that when we turn to spiritual life, when we make a firm resolve to consciously do what is right, to do what is good, oftentimes in the beginning, it's a little bit easy. It's a little bit easy because there is this initial enthusiasm, there is this hope, and we are able to feel a good amount of success. You will have noticed that even when you began your practice of meditation, many people have seen it, that the first few days, maybe immediately after your initiation, the first few days or weeks are actually great because we have this, the freshness of the practice, that initial energy, hope, enthusiasm all get together, and we feel we just kind of march ahead and just feel so wonderful. But many of us also notice that that initial euphoria, that initial success, that initial feeling of, well, I can achieve anything, I can vanquish any challenge, slowly then we begin to see after a few days or weeks that then there are hurdles. It's then that oftentimes we begin to find that, oh, there is, I'm not able to concentrate today. I'm not able to, I'm just feeling too disturbed. And then all these troubles start. We see the little bit of that here how in the beginning, when all these forces of Mahishasura came, the Devi was effortlessly able to finish them off. But then when the real demons within us, the powerful demons within us begin to raise their head, then we are not able to vanquish them so easily. Then it's a long struggle, it's a long fight. But what this myth also showed, the story shows, is that ultimately the Devi is able to finish. Now, interestingly, if you see the Mahishasura, that is final battle, he changes his forms. So first he came as Mahisha, as a buffalo. And then when the Devi slashed him, then he comes I think he comes in a human form again. And the Devi again decapitates him. Then he comes in a form of an elephant. The Devi decapitates that. And then finally, when for trying all these different forms, then finally he goes back to his own form in the Mahisha, as a buffalo. And then she then takes the spear and pierces him, and half of his form, the real demon within, now comes out of that. Now, what do we learn from this? And it is this, that sometimes when this battle ensues within our own heart, continues within our own heart, our weaknesses, our faults, our defects, our negativities don't surrender immediately. It's quite a fierce battle. We are not oftentimes willing to recognize our weaknesses to be what they are. We often try to justify ourselves. We try to change form. So once I feel a certain part of me is threatened, then rather than accept that there is something wrong there which needs to be corrected, I try to change that form. I then try to say, no, it's not like this. It's really because of this. So I've kind of shifted form and again trying to justify. And then the light of the Devi, the light of that higher consciousness within us, exposes that. And then again I change form and say, no, it's not because of this. It's like we try to justify the mistakes that we make. For if not this reason, then I say, it's because of this it happened. Then when that gets exposed, we give some other reason. But finally, a time comes, we have nowhere to hide. We cannot change our forms anymore. And once the true form comes up, once the weakness within us, that negativity within us, acknowledges its true negativity, it's then that it is destroyed. Now the question here is, interesting question would be, the power, the power of destruction is also power. And Shakti is the mother. So how can Mother Shakti destroy another Shakti? So really what Mother is destroying is not the power itself, because that is indestructible, but the power that was getting distorted. So it's the distorting medium that is being destroyed. By that I mean is this, that power as power is one. What makes the power good or what makes it bad, what makes it positive or what makes it negative, is not the intrinsic difference in the power itself, but the medium, the way in which that power is being manifested. When that power is manifested in constructive ways through a constructive shell, and we call those shells the devas, and then that's a power for the good. When that power gets manifested in a destructive ways, in harmful ways, then that shell through which that power gets manifested, we call it danavas or demons. So what the Devi destroys is the shell, is the refracting medium, and then the power is liberated. And that's really what is often mean when we say after the Devi killed these danavas, they became liberated. Theistic sense makes no sense. How come these terrible people, they should have been rotting eternally in the hell, how come they got liberated? The reason is that in Vedanta, they don't see good and evil as two eternal realities. Because if good and evil are completely distinct, there is a school of thought which does believe that all that we need to do is to keep on destroying evil, and ultimately only good will remain. We don't know whether that's true. So far, it doesn't seem to have happened. Although the hope always springs in heart that we need to destroy evil so everyone will be good. If we look at history, if we look at now, the world in its essential characteristic doesn't seem to have changed much. There was good and evil in prehistoric times, in historic times, in the Middle Ages, and now as well. Sometimes we might have debate about whether the good is more or bad is more, but they seem to be coexisting. There are short spells of time when one seems to be more than the other, but by and large, there is some kind of a dynamic equilibrium between the two. The way the Durga Saptashati describes it, the way it's described in the Upanishads and the Gita, is that good and bad are not two absolute distinct realities, that the reality is one. But when that reality gets fragmented in different fragments, then depending on the nature of the fragment, the reality appears to be different. I mean, it's not too difficult to understand clearly. Obviously, we all know that how the nature of the reflection will depend on the quality of the reflecting medium. So if we have, say, 5 mirrors here, and one mirror is like crystal clean, well clean and polished, and the others have different. There's one is very filled with dust, the other has probably different colors splashed on it. Now, even if the same thing is reflected in these 5 mirrors, it's going to look very different. Although the reality has not changed, but what is different, the reflections look different because the reflecting medium is different. So all this talk about good and bad, it's not in the reality itself, but it is the coverings which are there. So when the Devi killed Mahishasura, she really killed that shell in which that Shakti was manifesting in such a terrible way. And when the shell was removed, the Shakti, which is really one, became one. And that's how when we read in myth that after the demons are killed, they become liberated and they became one with the Devi. It's in a sense of that power that is happening one. And after that happened, all the gods get together and sing a beautiful hymn to the Devi. One of the beauties of this text is that while interspersed with these battle scenes, which are truly very violent, are these extremely uplifting hymns. So whenever the Devi destroys evil, then all these gods get together and sing praises of the Devi. And these hymns, maybe it's sometime in future, we can take make a more detailed study of these hymns because they are very, very uplifting. Many people during this season, on this mother season as I call it, some people read the entire text, which is actually very beneficial and very helpful in spiritual life. But some people also pay special attention to these 3 or 4 hymns which come in this text. They are very, very uplifting. So what I'll do now is maybe just read just a few verses, just to kind of get an idea and just remind ourselves. For many of you, the text is not new. You have heard it. You have probably read it yourself. So let me just read just a few verses. Devyaya tatamidam jagadatma shaktya nishesha deva gana shakti samoha murtya तामम्बिकामखिलदेवमहर्षिपूज्यां भक्त्या नतास्म विदधातु शुभानि सा नः। देवी प्रसीद परमा भवती भवाय, सद्यो विनाशयसि कोपवती कुलानि। विज्ञातमेतदधुनैव यदस्तमेतत्, नीतं बलं सुविपुलं महिषासुरस्य। ते सम्मता जनपदेषु धनानि तेषां, तेषां यशांसि न च सीदति धर्मवर्गः। धन्यास्त एव निभृतात्मजभृत्यदारा, येषां सदाभ्युदयदा भवती प्रसन्ना। धर्म्याणि देव सकलानि सदैव कर्माणि, अत्यादृतः प्रतिदिनं सुकृती करोति। स्वर्गं प्रयाति च ततो भवति प्रसादात्, लोकत्रयेऽपि फलदाननु देवि तेन। दुर्गे स्मृता हरसि भीतिमशेषजन्तोः, स्वस्थैः स्मृता मतिमतीव शुभां ददासि। दारिद्र्यदुःखभयहारिणि का त्वदन्या, सर्वोपकारकरणाय सदार्द्रचित्ता। केनोपमा भवतु तेस्य पराक्रमस्य, रूपं च शत्रुभयकार्यतिहारि कुत्र। चित्ते कृपा समरनिष्ठुरता च दृष्टा, त्वय्येव देवि वरदे भुवनत्रयेऽपि। त्रैलोक्यमेतदखिलं रिपुनाशनेन, त्रातं त्वया समरमूर्धनि तेऽपि हत्वा। नीता दिवं रिपुगणाभयमप्यपास्तम्, अस्माकमुन्मदसुरारिभवं नमस्ते। शूलेन पाहि नो देवि पाहि खड्गेन चाम्बिके, घण्टास्वनेन नः पाहि चापज्यानिस्वनेन च। प्राच्यां रक्ष प्रतीच्यां च चण्डिके रक्ष दक्षिणे, ब्राह्मणेनात्मशूलस्य उत्तरस्यां तथेश्वरी। सौम्यानि यानि रूपाणि त्रैलोक्ये विचरन्ति ते, यानि चात्यन्तघोराणि तैरक्षास्मांस्तथा भुवम्। खड्गशूलगदादीनि यानि चास्त्राणि तेऽम्बिके, करपल्लवसङ्गीनि तैरस्मान् रक्ष सर्वतः। तैरस्मान् रक्ष सर्वतः। O Devi, who are supreme, be gracious to all creation, for when angered you can annihilate multitudes. We saw this the moment you brought Mahishasura's vast power to an end. Those to whom you are bounteous are honored among peoples. Theirs are riches, theirs are glories, and theirs righteous acts known to no limit. They indeed are blessed with devoted children, attendants, and wives. One who is virtuous and ever mindful performs daily all righteous deeds, O Devi, and by your grace attains to heaven. Are you not then the giver of rewards in all the three worlds? Remembered in distress, you remove fear from every creature. Remembered by the untroubled, you confer even great serenity of mind. Dispeller of poverty, suffering, and fear, who other than you is ever intent on benevolence toward all? The world attains happiness when you slay its foes, and though they may have committed enough evil to keep them long in torment, even as you strike down our enemies, O Devi, you think, may they reach heaven through death in battle with me. To what may your prowess be compared? Where else is there beauty so ravishing, yet striking fear into enemies? Where in the three worlds are compassion in heart and resolve in battle, seen as they are in you, O Devi? Protect us with your spear, O Devi, and protect us with your sword, O Ambika. Protect us with the clangor of your bell and the resonance of your bowstring. Guard us in the east and in the west, O Chandika. Guard us in the south and also in the north, O Ishwari, by brandishing your spear. With your gentle forms that move through the three worlds, and with your surpassingly terrible ones, protect us and also the earth. O Ambika, with sword, spear, mace, and whatever other weapons your tender hands have touched, protect us on all sides. So beautiful, beautiful prayers, and it's uplifting even to hear them. And there's some beautiful ways that these prayers have been put to music. You can find them anywhere. You can find them on Spotify or on iTunes. Yeah, and if you like to sing them yourself, you can do that as well. So we will pause here now for about 5 minutes, and then if you have any thoughts or ideas or comments, you can mention them in the section of the comments. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhuhu. Okay, let's look at the questions. Thank you for all these questions. Could you please suggest the book where we can read it as a prose? Now, there are many translations of the Durga Saptashati or Chandiya that are available. One is quite old, published from the Ramakrishna Mutt in Chennai, in Madras. It's simply titled Devi Mahatmyam, and it's translated by Swami Jagadishwarananda. A more recent translation, well, recent in the sense it was first published in 2003, which I like very much, and which I would strongly recommend. It's titled In Praise of the Goddess, the Devi Mahatmya and its meaning. So it's a translation and commentary by Devadatta Kali. So this is that book. It's published by Nicholas Hayes in Maine, not too far from here. Of course, it's available online. You can order it from Amazon or anywhere. It's really a very good translation. But if you just put the name of the book, you might find many translations. But this is, presently, this is my very favorite one. Even when we are exhibiting good deeds, how can we keep our ego from taking over and bringing us down? Even when we are doing good things, the ego is still there. So it's good to align our ego with the forces of good rather than with the forces of evil. So an ego which is the sense I send, which is alert, which has the clarity of vision to know what is truly in its self-interest, is the one that will not take us on the wrong path. See, whatever we do in life, we do it with the hope that it is going to make us happy. Even the worst person who does terrible things has somehow convinced themselves that that is what is going to make them happy. So there is no difference. But a person whom we then later designate as an evil person, that person's idea of being happy is not our idea of being happy. That the way that person thinks that this will make me happy, and sometimes in short term it does seem to succeed, but in long term that is not going to work. And so ego, it's not enough to just employ that ego, but that ego with the clarity will then know that only if I remain on the side of good, that which is good, that which is right, that will bring me happiness. But if I'm not alert, then I might wrongly think that that which is bad, that which is evil, I may not see evil as evil, but I might see it as good. I suspect that very few people do bad things seeing them as bad. Even people who do bad things have a justification for why they are doing it. So in some sense, they have convinced themselves that that is good in some form, in some way. And so it's just the clarity of vision to know what is right as right, to know what is not right as not right. And that is what is called viveka. That's what is called discernment. If we have a right viveka, right discernment, then we will know what is right and we will be able to distinguish it from what is wrong. And then we will be on the side. The last verse in the Gita is that which is the justice and rightness and all that is good will be where the Lord is, where God is. So that's how a spiritual seeker will look at it. Is Chandika slaying the ego in Mahishasura? Well, right now, of course, as we read it, it just seems like she just destroying the shell that became the Mahishasura. And then the power which was hidden in it, which was manifesting in an evil way, that got liberated. The one thing I would like to say about the ego in the ultimate sense, yes, the ego has to be given up. But in a relative sense, ego is not the immediate problem. The immediate problem is the ego aligning with the forces of evil. And what we want is an ego aligning with the forces of good. Because even the gods, they have an ego too. It's not that only Mahishasura had an ego. But the ego of all these gods is aligned with the forces of good. That is why what they do is beneficial to themselves and to the creation. But the ego of Mahishasura is just the opposite. So ego itself is not so much the issue, but the ability of the ego to see clearly and to choose wisely. And then yes, of course, in the ultimate sense, the ego is what separates me from the rest. So when I want to attain my true nature as the infinite one, then this ego which limits me to only one identity, that ego will have to be given up. That's true. How does goodness get fragmented in our hearts? There are different ways of looking at it. We could first of all see how goodness has gotten fragmented in the world itself, objectively speaking, that there are 100 good people, and each of them individually can do a lot of good. But if all those 100 good people would come together and work as one unit, then together they will be able to do a lot more than what they could have done individually. So what they can do, a group of 100 people, the amount of good they can do is more than the summation of the good they could have done individually. And that's the power of organization. An organization can do much more than what any of its members could have done by themselves. But within us, there are all these good qualities that we have. Now, they are necessary, but they have also gotten divided. And so, can we distill those good qualities and bring it into one force? And the Devi, who is really that distilling of all those qualities. So fragmentation in the sense of whatever we see as the positive qualities, whether it is unselfishness, love, kindness, and so on, they are all powers of goodness, but the reason we are giving them different names because they manifest in different ways. Similarly, evil also gets fragmented in many different ways. At the heart of it, it's one unit. At the heart of it is one unit. Uh, and that brings us to the end of this week's questions. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.